Oh boy. It's really twilight out now. Just time for a good, scary story or two from the ace of spooky stories, Mr. Creepo here. So come on into Creepo's grotto and we'll all have a good time. And why aren't you a black cat? You're not supposed to be in there. Come on, kitty. Yeah. Bop, 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 bop. Yeah, I'm just doing a little, getting in shape here for my next round with Muhammad Ali. You know, the champ, the world's best prize fighter ever. Well, me and him were like this at one point. And Muhammad, man, he was into UFOs. He really dug that stuff. He had like 20 sightings. Pop, 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 pop. Come on, Ali. Pop, 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 pop. Yeah, yeah. Let's hear about what Ali had to say about those otherworldly visitors. Pop, 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 pop. Years ago, I spent some time as a stringer for the national tabloids, the Inquirer, the Globe, all famous publications you can still buy to this day at the supermarket checkout counter. One of my jobs was to spend time and interview famous people. Oh, I asked them a lot of the questions about who they were dating, what their home life was like, what they enjoyed doing. Of course, all the questions you'd expect to see asked at a gossip interview. But of course, with my own interest in the paranormal and UFOs, I was also interested in quizzing them perhaps a little bit off the beaten track about things that the public was not aware of that they might have an interest in as far as the unknown goes. Of all the famous people I spoke with, discussed UFOs with, and theories regarding extraterrestrials, I believe that the person that seemed to have the most interest, who followed the subject for a long time, was the heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali. I went to his home several times in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. He had quite a collection of classic cars in the driveway and people coming and going. And what a spectacular mansion, I guess you would call it. Ali was a really nice guy, as I guess most people are aware, and certainly very talkative. One of the few celebrities you couldn't really get away from. I mean, he would follow you right out to the parking area to continue the conversation. Ali was fascinated with UFOs because it was actually part of his religious faith. And he had numerous sightings. In fact, he claimed, he told me that he had seen UFOs on at least 20, if not more, occasions. One of the first sightings that he had was while he was out sprinting around the jogging trail in Manhattan's Central Park, up around 80th Street, I think he told me. It was around 5 a.m. in the morning, and he was with his longtime friend and trainer, Angelo Dundee. In fact, when I met him, it was up at the park along this jogging track when I met him for the first time, and he suggested that I jog right along with him. Well, luckily I was in a little bit better shape in those days. It was a much younger, firmer, trimmer Mr. Creepo. Anyway, the Knockout King explained to me that it was on a morning much like the one we were jogging around the park on, around 5 o'clock, when he happened to notice behind an apartment building off in the distance outside of the park a large object that seemed to be floating over the city. And he told me, and these are his words, he said, "I happened to look up just before dawn, as I often do while running, and there hovering above us was this brilliant light hanging as if from an invisible thread. At first I thought it was a helicopter, or a beacon projected from a helicopter, but moments later a similar object passed in front of us. The second UFO had a glowing red trail behind it. I brought it to the attention of my trainer, who was standing nearby. We watched them come from behind the skyline and move slowly across the sky for at least 15 minutes. The best I can describe the sighting is to say that they were just big and round." And he did file a report
with the local police department. And in fact, he found out later on, he was told that a pilot coming in for a landing at Newark Airport had also seen something strange in the sky that particular day. Later on, we went back to the hotel. I was with Harold Sulkin, an associate of mine who works with me at Global Communications, and another reporter. And Ali took the time to tell us about his experiences with UFOs. Apparently, on a number of occasions, he had actually seen them fairly close up. In fact, in the book that I did several years ago called UFOs Among the Stars, there's an autographed a copy of a drawing Ali did of one of the ships. It's a mighty magnificent craft, to say the least.
Well, you know, being a serious UFO investigator really isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And if you're a UFO witness, heaven help you, all kinds of strange things are likely to happen. Let's take the case, for example, of John Clark, because things really started to happen the minute he had his UFO experience.
The following is an excerpt from the book Strange Encounters, Bizarre and Eerie Contact with UFO Occupants. It's the case of John Clark, which contains just about every strangeness effect a UFO researcher is likely to run into during the course of a single investigation. Though we do not as yet know why certain individuals seem to attract the unknown, John Clark, in this respect, certainly turned out to be a paranormal magnet. From the book. In the classic film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, we see how the sudden appearance of a UFO eventually comes to radically change the lifestyle of Roy Neary. Following his brush with a pulsating craft, the power linesman finds he is the subject of considerable ridicule, even by members of his own family. His wife leaves him. His children are the brunt of neighborhood jokes, and he finds himself out in the street without a job because he was in the wrong place at the right time. And even though Close Encounters was basically a science fiction epic, almost everything that happened in the motion picture has transpired at one time or another in reality. The appearance of UFOs have indeed had bizarre effects on many witnesses. Take the case of John Clark. Things both good and bad have been happening all around him since he saw a landed spaceship way back in 1975. Clark was on vacation with his wife when he underwent an experience he is certainly not likely to forget. After the incident, John's life turned around. A truck driver for the San Francisco Chronicle, Clark won $40,000 in a contest, and he admits his luck may have had something to do with what transpired in that day many years ago in the Sequoia National Park. Unfortunately, John Clark's luck has not been all good. He maintains that his good fortunes are paralleled by negative happenings. For example, tornadoes have leveled hotels where he is staying And in addition, several times the engine of a plane he will be flying in will cut off mysteriously. To date, John Clark has gone to see priests, psychics, and psychiatrists in an attempt to find out what has been causing these strange things to transpire around him. So far, no one seems to have all the answers. For Clark, it all began in the summer of 1975, when he was on vacation with his wife, and they have since divorced, but let John tell the story himself. And I quote, "My former wife and I were camping with another couple. I heard something and woke up. I saw this thing, about 9 feet tall, with long blonde hair, kind of illuminated, sort of gliding across the clearing. My friend saw it too and ran for his gun. Then it was gone." The next day, Clark says his wife took out a Ouija board and tried to communicate with whoever or whatever it was that had crossed in front of them during the night. Her hands began to move of their own accord, and little by little, a strange message was given on the board. The board spelled out the name Huon, that's Q-O-N, indicating that it was a source of communication for the universe, with a station positioned approximately 5 million light years away in space. The Clarks had seen Bigfoot, an alien that crashed there in 1863 from the planet Pluto. And it gets more bizarre. The message stated that Bigfoot was a vegetarian and lived in caves. And this is something we followed for a long time. If you're interested in the Shaver mystery and the subterranean world, and we'll be talking more about that later on. It is said that the alien had been shot twice by humans. Shaken by what had been told through the Ouija board, John and his wife tossed the device into the nearest trash can. Perhaps they should have held on to it in order to sort out what was to happen over the next several years. As time went on, Clark became more disturbed over the session with the Ouija board and the sighting of this tall being. He went around consulting so-called experts. He went to see several ministers who simply told him that he had bumped into the devil. On the other hand, representatives of the Academy of Psychic Sciences, located in San Diego, strongly suggested that he had seen a mammal that had escaped Greenland during the Ice Age. Others talked in terms of ghosts and supernatural experiences. Nobody seemed to have a heck of a lot of answers. Eventually, according to a column in the San Francisco Chronicle, Clark was placed into a hypnotic trance. The paper printed the session of what took place during the regression. Now you're back in Sequoia Park. The night it happened. You're going to raise your left hand and bring it across your chest, the hypnotist said. Now there's nothing to be afraid of. You can tell us what happened that night. Clark started to talk. His speech was like warm milk. I was surrounded by a blue light, a bright blue light. I was cold, he said. Did you feel any sensation? The hypnotist asked. I was being lifted, Clark responded. What happened then? The hypnotist wanted to know. I'm lying on a table. There's a bright white light above me. There's big eyes looking down at me. What color are the eyes? Yellow, big yellow eyes. They had black slits in them. I couldn't see their bodies. Could you feel anything? Something cold in my stomach. Something sticking in and out of my stomach like steel pins. You mean like they were probing you? Yes, that's what I mean. Can you remember anything else? No. John Clark is still not satisfied that he has all the answers. He plans to continue to probe deeper to find out exactly what happened on that night several years ago. We don't have the answers either. Maybe you do.
I bet you that was a little bit more than the average person would like to handle in their lives. Well, outside of maybe that $40,000, but it went downhill from there. Wonder what John is doing these days, how his luck has turned, and whether he's seen any more UFOs. Baby, light my fire here. Hey, come on. Now we're going to hear about the people downstairs, and I don't mean my cousin Beelzebub. We're going to talk about the Shaver mystery, Ray Palmer, and the people down below. You guys down there, you coming up now? All right. Whoa.
One of my interests is in subterranean worlds, the strange things that go on underground, right beneath our feet, that most people are not aware of at all. Because there's a strange world that exists, a world that we normally don't have contact with. But there are strange things afoot, and I discuss them in my book, Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth. In 1967, I set out to publish a collection of essays discussing the controversial claims of Richard Shaver, the man who, with the help of publisher Ray Palmer, had brought a collective wrath of organized science fiction down upon their heads. My interest in Shaver was perhaps in itself unusual, for my research had centered almost exclusively at that point upon the study of unidentified flying objects. When remarking about this to other researchers, however, I was surprised to find that throughout ufology, which is the study of UFOs, was a widespread interest in the Shaver mystery, if only because it had been considered as one of the many theories to explain the origin and purposes of the flying saucers. Once I began putting this book together, I was once again surprised at the direction Shaver had led me. I discovered that the interior of our world was, aside from Shaver's Nero and Tiro, these demented little beings who are said to live in caverns and cause all kinds of chaos up here on the surface, that other caverns around the world were allegedly populated by a variety of other denizens of the deep, all discovered and created by a great variety of writers and researchers throughout history. Although many of these underworld ideas differed from Shaver, a common thread prevailed. There probably were as many people I discovered living beneath the earth as on the surface. As my collection of material grew, I realized that the book that I was later to turn out should not be just a resume of the Shaver mystery, but of the whole spectrum of legends and evidence about strange happenings beneath the surface of the earth. That original book became The Shaver Mystery and the Inner Earth, and later, Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth, which is still in print today. This book has been perhaps the best received of my early literary efforts. During the 25 years since the first Inner Earth book was published, I have had the opportunity to collect more ideas from a variety of sources and bring them together. I have vast files of material proving that we are not alone on this earth, that there are other beings that reside here alongside of us. In one of the chapters in the book, which I titled The Green Children of Wolf Peters, I tell a very strange story concerning two young people. If, as Shaver claims, various races of people live underground, it is only reasonable that they should emerge upon occasion. The most famous case involving the discovery of two subsurface people in the year 1100 took place in the small English town of Wolf Peters. The entire story is related in an article done at the time by Abbot Ralph of the nearby community of Cogshell. We quote from this text, cleaning it up a little bit so that it's more understandable in modern English. This boy and girl, brother and sister, came out of holes at Mount Mary de Wolf Peters next to the edge of a pit found there. They had all the members like those of other men, but in the color of skin they differed from other mortals of earth. For the surface of their skin, none could understand it. At that time, weeping inconsolably, they were taken out of astonishment to the house of Richard de Con and Wilkes. Bread and other food was placed before them, but they would not eat, and indeed, with great hunger from fasting, they were a long time tormented. Because, as the girl confessed, that all the food could not be consumed by them. However, at last, beans cut off or torn from stalks were brought to the house, and they fell on them with great care. Now these beans were given to them, and they broke open the bean stalks, not the pod or shells of the beans, evidently supporting that the beans were contained in the hollows of the stalk. But not finding beans within the stalk, they again began to weep, which when the bystanders noticed, they opened the shells and showed them the beans themselves. Whereupon, with great joyfulness, they ate beans for a long time entirely and would touch no other food. The boy, however, grew weaker and weaker and died in a short period of time. The girl indeed always enjoyed good food, and growing accustomed to whatever food was placed or set before her, completely lost the green color of her skin, and by degrees regained the normal red-blooded complexion of a normal person's body. And after being regenerated by the holy waters of baptism for many years, remained in the service of the soldier that she had stayed with. She eventually affirmed that all who dwelt in her land or who lived there were colored green, and no sun would be perceived there, but that a brightness or shining such as would happen after sunset was visible at all time. Asked in what manner she had come from the land with the boy, she replied that they were following sheep and arrived at a certain cavern. On entering it, they heard a certain sound of bells, and in trying to reach the sweet sound, they wandered for a long time through the cavern until they came to its end. Emerging, the excessive brightness of our sun and the warm temperature of our air astonished and terrified them. For a long time they laid upon the edge of the cave. When overcome with dread, they wished to flee, but they could not in the least find entrance to the cavern until they were seized by the people of the countryside. There are other stories that have been collected over the year of other people coming up from underground cities and worlds. It seems that many of the UFOs that have been observed may not originate in outer space, but may be coming from this world beneath our feet.
Well, shit, growing up, I thought all the kids in my neighborhood were green. I didn't think that was too strange, and I never asked them where the heck it was that they came from. But, my goodness, look at this. This burning timber reminds me of a lost mine story. How would you like to hear about Mr. X is dealing with this strange being in a deserted old mine out west? It might spook you. You might want to go and hide under the bed, but after all, this is Creepo's Twilight Tales.
Continuing with our interest in the subterranean world, let me tell you the story of Mr. X. Back in the 1960s, I was good friends with a gentleman by the name of John J. Robinson. Jack lived over in Jersey City, and he was a massive collector of material on UFOs, the Shaver mystery, and anything unusual. We used to meet at Jack's house, every couple of weeks. A group of us would sit around. Augie Roberts, well-known photographer who had taken snapshots of UFOs over the New York City skyline, and Dominic Lucchesi, who was always dabbling in free energy and anti-gravity devices he'd like to tinker with. Jim Mosley, editor of the Saucer News. We'd sit around and we'd bullshit for Jackpot, just up all night to the wee hours discussing these subjects. Jack was a regular guest on the all-night talk show Long John Neville. Long John was, of course, one of the pioneers, the main pioneer in late-night talk shows. Took phone calls from listeners in 30 states and had on a lot of people who claimed some pretty far-out stuff, from those like Howard Menger and George Adamski, who said that they had taken trips on board flying saucers to other planets and said it in a very sincere manner and made you want to believe it, to people like Jack, who was an investigator and a collector. Anyway, Jack related the story to me, and I published it in The Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth, and basically it's told in the words of Mr. X himself. Jack never did tell me the name of the individual, the actual name of the individual, because the fellow was not interested, as you can understand why in just a few minutes, in any sort of publicity or to get his name around. He didn't want to be pestered by investigators. He just wanted to keep to himself. So Mr. X's story starts as thus. When I was 17, I had just graduated from high school. I spent my summer vacation visiting a former schoolmate who had moved from Los Angeles. His family had moved to a small town northwest of Los Angeles, and we had arranged that I would visit him for the summer whenever I graduated. Fred suggested that since he had to leave on the late bus, we visit a place even he had never been to, a section of country only 3 hours of fast cycling from the town. It was a place the townspeople called the Haunted Mine. The townspeople usually avoided it, he said. I asked him why the mine was said to be haunted, and he told me that the people who had dug the mine ran into some sort of long cave like a tunnel after they had dug down quite a ways. It was after this that they had had trouble. What sort of trouble? Mr. X wanted to know. Well, he didn't exactly know, but according to what he had heard, miners had been killed when portions of this tunnel fell in on them. Other miners had disappeared, and he understood that a couple of the deaths of investors in the mine had been seemingly strange, but he didn't really have all the details. At any rate, all the trouble seemed to start after they broke into this underground space. The mine had evidently petered out, and what with all the trouble, it was deserted as a complete loss. No one visited the mine or lived near it anymore. I asked Fred how we would manage to locate the mine if he had never been there. But Fred said that a friend of his had visited the mine and told him about the roads and how to locate it. When I asked Fred, my friend, if he could persuade his friend to go along, Fred said that the friend had broken his neck falling from a cliff he was climbing the day after he had visited the mine. That's odd, isn't it? I asked Fred, and he told me the only thing odd about it was that his friend had climbed the cliff when a path leading to the top was only a 10-minute walk from where he was found clutching a piece of black cloth in his hand. I guess he spotted the piece of black cloth, climbed up to get it, and fell when he reached for it. We started out for the haunted mine early that morning and cycled on increasingly poorer roads until we were somewhere way up in the mountains. We had to leave our bicycles because the road we came to was so bad that it was impassable. Fallen trees and large rocks had rolled down the side of the mountains. We left our cycles and started to climb up the road. Fred told me the opening to the mine was located on that road, but that the road led around the other side of the mountain. We climbed the road for about 20 minutes, and then we rounded the mountain and came upon a spur of rock. When we continued on the road around the rock, we came to a cleared area, which had several deserted buildings standing together on the edge of the mountain. Past the buildings loomed a pile of debris, which eventually had been dug up. When we continued on the road around the rock, we came to a cleared area which had several deserted buildings standing together on the edge of the mountain. Past the buildings loomed a pile of debris which had evidently been dug from the ground and allowed to slide past the top of the pile down the side of the mountain. The entrance to the mine was evidently located behind one of the buildings and on the other side of the pile of debris. We passed the building and started around the pile from the mine when suddenly we came to the entrance. It was then we saw it. Standing on the edge of the mine, as if on guard, was the most frightening creature I had ever seen. The being, that's what I call him, the being was about 4.5 feet tall, but very large around, with eyes large and circular, and the head seemed to be covered with a sort of hood. While it seemed to have wings which were folded around in front of it, We saw no arms. The portion of the body on what might be a person's chest was covered with large scales of almost a reptilian nature, like the skin of a huge snake. There was a projection that seemed to come up from what might be termed the shoulders and outlined the back of the lower portion of the head. The being, the creature, whatever you want to call it, had no neck. Projecting behind it like a spread cloak seemed to be a huge bird-like tail. The legs were short and chunky, and the feet, if that's what they were, seemed to be encased in a sort of box-like boot, or if it were not a boot, to be more like the type of a hoof. What appeared to be the face had eyes and a mouth, and with what might have been termed a nose. It reminded me of the look of a demon from hell. Frightening story, you bet, and it goes on. Mr. X continues. When the being saw us, it let out a scream, like an animal, and started around the edge of the mine towards us. It rustled its wings or cloak, as if it had arms, but we did not stop to see. We broke out of the paralysis of fright and wheeled in retreat at full speed. We covered the 20 more minutes of hillside road in less than 5. Believe me, we got out of there in a hurry. We grabbed our bicycles and set off at breakneck speed over the road for home. We rode so fast that we covered that 3-hour journey in less than 2.5 hours. Fred drove directly to the bus station where he checked his cycle and got on the bus, which took off before the one he had expected to take. I locked my bike outside the local motion picture theater and took in the show. During the latter part of the picture, I noticed a rather short person with a dark face, even in the dim theater, who seemed to be going up and down the aisle, evidently looking for someone. He seemed to stop very often at the row of seats I was in and glance down them in my direction. At the end of the picture, I left the show with a crowd of people. As I started to ride my cycle home to Fred's house, I felt as if someone or something was following me. And in some of the street intersections, I noticed people who seemed to be similar to the person dressed in black who had prowled the aisles of the theater. When I passed rapidly, these people always seemed to be watching me. But since it was dark by then, I couldn't be sure. At one time, a short person dressed in black dived out of an alley toward me on a deserted street, but I swerved around and continued on my journey back to Fred's house. I rode frantically down a tree-covered lane toward home, or at least where I was staying, when suddenly a huge limb of a tree broke off above me. Were it not for my speed, the limb would have crushed me beneath it. As it was, the leaves on the outermost branches whipped across my back and the rear wheel of my bicycle. I arrived at Fred's home and drove up the driveway, leaving my cycle at the foot of the porch. I dived up the stairs and rang the bell frantically. As I did so, I noticed a short figure start towards the house from a corner about 200 yards away. Fred's mother answered the door, and I told her that I was tired and was going to bed at once. When I reached the attic room, I drew the blinds and lit the lights and packed all my clothes. After that, I put out the light and cracked the blind. As I looked out, I felt sure that I could see a dark form squatting in the tree limb, which came close to the window in the nearest tree. Although the night was hot, I did not open the window, nor did I sleep at all. Instead, I kept watch all that night, and I know that there was someone in that tree, for his shadow drifted down the side of the tree and crossed the lawn shortly before daylight. In the morning, I told Fred's mother that I had called home that evening from a pay station and that my parents had asked me to return home at once. I left for Los Angeles on the first bus that morning and kept a close watch to make sure I was not being followed. After I arrived home, I waited a day and then went to a pay station and called Fred. His mother said that Fred had arrived home the day I left, but that he had gone off on his bicycle that morning. To make a long story short, Fred's cycle was later found at the beginning of the impassable road to the haunted mine. To this day, Fred has never been found, and to this day, I am afraid that whoever or whatever it was that got Fred could find me.
Shiver me timbers, literally timbers, huh? In that story that Mr. X told. And in the fire here, boy, it seems like it's getting really cool out here. Or maybe it's just the bizarreness of Mr. Creepo's Twilight Tales. Huh? If you don't mind shivering some more, stay tuned for the next one now. Don't go away.
Some time was to pass before I was to see Muhammad Ali again, which is to be expected considering the fact that he is such in demand all over the world as a champion prize fighter, a celebrity, and a peacemaker. Our next confrontation was at Ali's training camp high in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania at Deer Lake. This time I went along with an entire entourage, including my friend Harold Salkin, health writer Herbert Bailey, and super psychic Uri Geller. Uri Geller, of course, is the Israeli psychic who professes to be in touch with UFO intelligence and has the ability to bend spoons, metals, and control a lot of things with his mind. Very controversial individual. You've probably seen him on a lot of the late-night talk programs. In addition to finding out more about Ali's UFO experiences, Ali expressed interest in meeting the young Israeli sensitive, who was said to have the power to bend metal utensils and make objects disappear and reappear upon command. For the record, and I read from UFOs Among the Stars, Geller put on quite a show that afternoon. I remember him standing in the outside doorway of one of the buildings on the campsite with Ali's ex-wife Belinda. Clasping her hand in his, Uri asked her to tell him when she felt something unusual happening. After a minute or two, she commented that she felt her ring getting warm. After another minute or so, she commented that she felt her ring getting even warmer. After another minute of deep concentration, Geller removed his hand, and everyone standing around gasped out loud. Without applying any physical strength that was visible to the naked eye, the stone inside Belinda's ring had vanished from its setting and was nowhere to be found. Hopefully it wasn't a valuable stone because I do not recall it being returned, like all professional magicians would do as part of their act. Later, Uri Geller was talking with one of Ali's sparring partners when he asked if he could demonstrate his powers again. He held a very heavy religious medal that was around the boxer's neck, and by merely touching it, and without pressing hard on it even, Geller made a considerable impression in the metal with his fingertip. Again, everyone was impressed, and there was no logical explanation as to how this extraordinary feat was accomplished. Meanwhile, back in the main house, Muhammad Ali was doing some fancy trick work of his own. It turns out that the champ is a bit of a magician and thinks he can do everything Geller can do by sleight of hand. He did accomplish an impressive rope trick where a piece of heavy hemp was sliced in two pieces only to have it turned back into a single piece of rope. Probably something you've seen him or other magicians do on the late-night Johnny Carson, Jay Leno show. Apparently some of Ali's professional magician friends had told him that everything Geller did was not the real thing and to be leery about what he was claiming to accomplish. Be that as it may, once the magical interlude of our visit was out of the way, Ali happily returned to the topic of UFOs that he seemed genuinely more comfortable with than psychic phenomena. Remember how I told you about Elijah Muhammad's belief in a large mothership circling the Earth? Well, I think this is what I observed recently over my training camp here, Ali told me. Probing into giving additional details, Ali seemed willing to talk about his sighting, which had taken place over a 2-night period on a Friday and Saturday during the summer. Ali told me I had been training for 3 hours in the afternoon, getting ready to do battle with George Foreman. After a light supper, I decided to take a stroll around the ground. At around 9 p.m., and it had just gotten dark, I walked up a gravel path that runs along back of our log cabin gym. The nighttime sky was as picturesque as one of my poems, he had injected, sort of laughing as he went on. The sun had been down for quite a short while, and the sky was still quite light. Suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, Ali's eye caught a glimpse of a bright glowing orb off in the distance. At first I thought this flicker was the North Star rising in the heavens, he told me. However, within moments I could tell I was watching something out of the ordinary. Ali went on, talking with unusual candor, and he told me, before I could blink my eyes, this light, if that's what it was, had come down toward the mountains until it hovered right above the valley where we are. I knew I couldn't be dreaming. Sure enough, it was still there. This had to be one of those big ships they talk about. The UFO was streamlined and shaped sort of like a cigar, but blunt on both ends. I couldn't see any windows or anything, but I'm certain there must have been people on board. I asked how he knew it wasn't a helicopter or an airplane. Ali said that the object acted like no conventional aircraft he was familiar with. First it would stand still, he told me, and then move about, jumping from one portion of the sky to another. From time to time, it would speed away up to the far reaches of the heavens, and then minutes later it would come down toward us again. It did this numerous times during the 2 hours I watched it. Sounds like quite a spectacular sighting. Only one of many told to me by Muhammad Ali and other celebrities, as recounted in the book UFOs Among the Stars.
Man, between this fire and going them 3 rounds, I didn't think I'd ever take them down, but pop, pop, pop. Ah, man. Are you ready for some more tales from Creepo's Crypt? You got 'em, babe. We all live in a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine, a yellow... Hey, you know, not only your average person out there has seen UFOs and encountered the unknown, but quite a few celebrities too. Take John Lennon and his one-time girlfriend, May Pang. They encountered one of them, and it wasn't out in the country. It was right in New York City. She told me the story firsthand, and so let's hear it for John Lennon's Big Apple UFO while we try not to set Creepo's estate on fire here, folks.
This is John Lennon's Big Apple UFO story. Though we'll never know for sure, we hope the aliens on board the craft that buzzed John Lennon's 53rd Street penthouse apartment weren't shy. For according to the late Beatles' ex-girlfriend, the famed mod rocker was standing on the balcony in his birthday suit, enjoying the view when his quiet evening at home was interrupted by the lights of a vehicle from God knows where. May Pang is one of the warmest people you'll ever want to meet. She's quick to smile and bring you into her confidence, for unlike many others in the rock and roll business who can sometimes take themselves way too seriously, May is happy to share her remembrances about one of the greatest legends of rock and roll of all time. An American-born young lady of Chinese ancestry, May worked for Lennon as his assistant for almost 3 years, living with the Beatle during the time he was separated from Yoko Ono. Seated in her spacious apartment, May doesn't mind talking about the old days and sharing her wisdom and knowledge with those who are truly fascinated with Lennon's contribution to the culture of the 60s and the 70s before he was cut down by a madman's bullet. John was always fascinated with the unknown, May explained, handing me his once treasured copy of the I Ching that she still has on her library shelf. He was always caught up in his fate, his destiny. He was, it seems, trying to understand his greatness and the impact he had on millions growing up in the very confused, almost lost generation. In an interview Lennon had once admitted that he held a particular fascination with psychic phenomena. Going back to when he was a kid, he says, "I used to literally trance out into the alpha. I didn't know what it was called then. I found out years later that there was a name for these conditions. But I would find myself seeing hallucinatory images of my face changing and becoming cosmic and complete. It caused me always to be a rebel." My own inkling that John was truly fascinated with the paranormal came while I was doing an article on a faith healer by the name of Dean Kraft, who, it was said, had a remarkable ability to move objects across the floor or a tabletop without touching them. It had been reported that John Lennon had befriended the gifted sensitive and had invited Dean Kraft over to his apartment in the historic Dakota building across from Central Park. "Yes," confirmed Lennon in a telephone conversation that I had with him, "Dean apparently does have these powers. In fact," Lennon told me, "one night recently, Yoko and I watched as he made some hard candies, still wrapped in their cellophane, just jump out of a candy dish and move across the tabletop until they landed on the floor. In no time," insisted Lennon, "did he ever touch them." Unfortunately, with the exception of a concert I gave, at which his personal backup band, Elephant's Memory, appeared, I never really got to speak with John again. However, May Pang was more than willing to give me the scoop on John's Big Apple UFO encounter. And I quote from what she told me. "We had just ordered some pizza, and since it was a warm evening, we decided to step out onto the terrace. There were no windows directly facing us from across the street, so John just stepped outside with nothing on in order to catch a cool breeze that was coming in right off the East River. I remember I was just inside the bedroom getting dressed when John started shouting for me to come out onto the terrace. I yelled back that I would be right there, but he kept screaming for me to join him that instant. As I walked out onto the terrace, my eyes caught this large circular object coming towards us. It was shaped like a flattened cone, and on top was a large, brilliant red light, not pulsating as on any of the aircraft we'd see heading for a landing at Newark Airport. May says she and John stood there mesmerized, unable to believe what they were in the process of observing. When it came a little closer, she told me, we could make out a row or circle of white lights that ran around the entire rim of the craft. These were also flashing on and off. There were so many of these lights that it was dazzling to the mind. Certainly psychedelic, right? Spellbound, the couple watched the UFO move directly over the building next to where they resided. It was, I would estimate, the size of a Learjet, and it was so close that if we had something to throw at it, we probably could have hit it quite easily, May recalls. During the time that it was almost directly overhead, May says that she didn't hear any noise. We often had helicopters flying about us, but this was as silent as the night, 17 stories up above street level. Finally, the object passed from view, leaving John and May feeling that the excitement was over for one evening. But as it turned out, the UFO returned. The light was so brilliant coming from the craft, May recalls years later, that no additional detail could be seen. We did take a couple of pictures, but they turned out overexposed. Immediately, John and May telephoned the Daily News and were told at least 7 other reports had been received. We even called the police. That's how excited we were, and they told us to keep calm, that others had seen it too. According to May, all night long, John Lennon kept saying, "I can't believe it, I can't believe it, I've finally seen a flying saucer." And that is, folks, John Lennon's Big Apple UFO story.
So, next time you're near Central Park, in Strawberry Fields, think of John Lennon and remember that night naked on the balcony with May Pang and the UFO.